songwriter.
The photo is aging, droplets of sudden red.
Producer. Composer. Band leader. Recording studio honcho. And the founder of Create Interesting Music, which is a mentorship program which helps creative guitarists develop into full-fledged artists. Yeah, okay, yeah. So I can kind of summarize what we were talking about, which is that I think towards the end of the conversation about the outro to Only Shallow, you were saying that like one of the things that you'd wanted to get out of joining the program was figuring out how to create stuff that like was satisfying for like, you know, like what you want from like even just the sounds of things, like you were talking about like the width of the sound of those guitars in the outro. And you know, things that feel harmonically engaging and things that feel I think in the case of that maybe like rhythmically interesting, because we were talking about the time signature and there were a few possible like interpretations, but it was very difficult to pin down. Like so I think things that are going to be like satisfying, and maybe digging into that word satisfying would be useful if that feels useful for you to like get specific about that, and then have it be like something that accomplishes that without just being tons of crazy stuff right up front. Or like without it being like just super like like way over the top and like maximalist.
Yeah, for sure. Let's stick on this one. I had a different idea, but I tried to play around with it over the weekend, and it's too modal. I was like, oh, the shakuhachi is like pentatonic. What if I tried to do something that's pentatonic so that I'm getting better at knowing the intervals of the shakuhachi, and then also just kind of like thinking in that way and some parameters. But I recently learned that like all of the notes in between are found by like changing the angle of the flute to your mouth, so you can get those like half steps and stuff. So for this challenging, interesting, subtle, dynamic piece that we're gonna build, do like, I guess like for going about it, do we want to do, should I go into it thinking I'm gonna perfect this thing, or should I like be like create 8 sketches or like get this many ideas down? How polished do you want the finished product to be?
That's a good question. It's interesting because like so many, I think the goal that we're setting forth is like a very personal and specific one, like for you, like and like relative to like your tastes. And so I might not like I'm really down to help steer and guide the process and stuff. And yet I feel like we won't know, or I won't be able to know for sure like what the final result is until you're like, this is what's satisfying. So I think there are different ways that we could approach it. I think sketching can be useful. I think generally speaking, aiming to write one perfect song is like that doesn't that like for the processes that I'm going through right now, that rarely happens because often the most interesting things kind of come up as a result of the process, you know? Yeah, so probably starting off with a handful of sketches. Maybe like yeah. I'm thinking about this word like satisfying. Because there are like it feels like there were a specific set of things that were really like doing it for you with the My Bloody Valentine thing. So like so I'll give you like the MBV example. I mean like stereo width. There's like some like frequency content stuff in there in that it's like not super bright. Like there aren't a lot of high frequencies. It's like low passed.
Yeah, it's got that vacuum effect that I was like referencing, like the sag, I think is what it's called, where it's just like swallowing up the low end and it's got this like
Oh yeah, yeah.
dropout almost, and you're like, oh, this is cool.
Right. And that's like what I think maybe at one point I described as like negative pulse, where like when it attacks, it goes down instead of up. So like
Mhm.
the pulse that we're feeling is actually like a reduction in sound. So
Mhm.
I'll make these new things. Okay. Vacuum slash negative pulse. How do we feel about the guitar playing specifically?
I don't know how to spell timbre.
Oh, Tim.
Tim.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like timber, but
Timbre.
timbre. Yeah.
Um, yeah, how do I want the guitar to sound? That note on like different timbres is kind of hitting on that. Like I I'm always trying to get that low end suction type of sound. So I'll be aiming for that on a few of the sketches, but I do want to kind of play around with different timbres in the same sketch and then just like some on the higher end as well.
Yeah.
Um, I
Yeah,
was
and
like,
oh yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was listening to some old stuff and like one really effective song where it's just one guitar track um, sets like a really repetitive tone and then just goes up a whole octave at the end with the same progression and like even that is effective.
Yeah,
So I was like, oh, cool. I could do something as simple as that.
cool. Yeah. Let's yeah, what's the name of that song?
It's like one that I wrote a long time ago.
Oh, okay, cool.
I could link it to you. It's a really funny summer. Like it's cool when um the stuff I'm doing is like so that moment in time because then when you go back to it you're just like oh yeah dude that was just that one summer.
I've got a couple quick things that I was thinking about with the guitar part too.
Yeah.
Yes, there are some things that are going on with how like the My Bloody Valentine guitar part's working, which
Mhm.
is like I'll just list like a few. There's like mixture of fretted low strings and open higher strings, I believe. There's some of that like in the mix, like different hand shapes on the lower strings, but all the or all the chord shapes were specifically on the lower strings, right?
Mhm.
Like, yeah, okay, so that alone is a useful like division of like, okay, we're not going to play a chord on the top three strings, like we're trying to keep it low. Okay, and then also often different voicings or placements of the quote same chord in sequence. So two different C chords, for example.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't actually if it's in G. Yeah, I think there might be a C chord in there, but either way, it's like there was some point where there was a chord and you were changing the voicings on it, like moving your hands around, and
Mhm.
that's interesting because uh, I'll just do this so that I can get back to that level of depth. Um, yeah, actually, for the sake of the recording, just in case this winds up being something that's used, I'll share this here. Um, yeah, what's cool about this is that it like or like consider how this affects harmonic rhythm. So like one measure of G with one voicing followed by one measure of C with two voicings, for example, or going off of that. So one measure of G with one voicing followed by one measure of C with two voicings. What if the second C voicing shows up on the second beat of the measure of C. So, like, for example, like this is a really specific case, but it's like we'd have, one, two, three, four on G, and then we'd have like one, two, three, four on C. And so, even though the whole chord is like quote unquote C, there's like transformation that's happening within it.
Hmm.
And in addition, it's like if it's being put on like the third beat, then it's like, oh, it's just like half as long. But if we start putting it on in other places or like in syncopated places, right? Like on off beats or whatever, then we start to get something else that can be really interesting to listen to, even though the chords are like pretty like simple. Um, yeah, so that's something. And then something else that was going on in that guitar part that's like related to like types of voicings, how like thinking about how different types of voicings interact with distortion.
Hmm.
And so there's that one chord, the part where like D major becomes a D power chord, for example. I
Hmm.
think, yeah. And it sounds less tense.
Hmm.
And that's just really interesting because the whole world of like functional harmony that we've been talking about is basically like the triad is the stable thing. And it's like, well, when we put a ton of distortion on it, a power chord sounds a lot more stable than the triad. And so that's really interesting. And so, like, for example, if we're using two different measure or two different phrasing, sorry, two different voicings of C that are following each other, if one of them is like a major chord, or it could be like like a six chord or like a 6/9 chord or just like different chords that are like they would be very consonant in another context, but with distortion they get really crunchy. It's like playing with different types of chords and resolving them into power chords is a super interesting thing there. Yeah, because yeah, those are just some thoughts about what they're doing in the My Bloody Valentine example. And
Hmm.
so uh yeah, it would be cool to list a few more things here before we kind of move on to like how to extrapolate out from this into new things. Um, but one of the things that we were talking about is more on the production side of things. I'm just putting this here so we can get back to that level of whatever, that level of depth with all the hyphens.
Hmm.
Okay, so stereo image. I already said this up here, stereo width, but like we have low low passed guitars on the side. And then we also have similar slash same part up an octave in the middle. Um, Up an octave in the middle. And then there's that question also of like um middle part, which uh sounds like it has the same source audio as the side parts at first, but at a certain point it breaks off.
Yeah.
And that's very, yeah, that's like that's super, yeah, that's super interesting to me. And then there's another thing going on, which is pulse as an element of production, rather than exclusively performance. And what I mean by that is that there is there are some strums. Like sometimes the guitar is strummed. But this is like to me relatively low importance relative to the role of the pulses and the sound that we're hearing. Um Question mark, relatively low importance. Okay, and so then other pulses like so there's like the delay pulse, which is a more like active thing where like because there when I hear the delay in the sound, I was hearing the chord like reattack, and those didn't necessarily sound like scoops. And the way that I could tell is that like when the chord would change, we'd still hear an attack of the last chord, and it wasn't in like a scooped way. So that's one level of pulse is delay. Another level of pulse is the like scoop pulse or like vacuum pulse or like negative pulse. Basically, pulse that exists by subtracting from the sound. Um, and so there are different ways to reach that. And I think it's difficult to tell exactly what they did because we can only kind of like, unless we were to like ask somebody who was there and they had amazing memory and knew it all perfectly. We're basically just trying to like reconstruct it. But options for getting that would be like side chaining to another instrument, particularly drums, including muted drums.
Hmm.
And then like reverse reversing effects, reverse reverb, just like reversing the waveform. We can mute the or bold these too. Another thing that you can do in a DAW, there's probably a way to do it live, or like in another way, maybe with tape, would be to like cut out each chord in the waveform and then reverse those chords. So you're not reversing the whole signal. It's like you're just saying chord one, here's where it
Hmm.
ends, there's chord two, reverse this, and then you get the waveform where it's quiet and gets big, you know. And then you can also play with patterns of that where it's like swell chord one, it's reversed, attack chord two, swell chord three, or whatever. And from there, the patterns can get more complex as desired. But basically, these are just different ways of creating negative pulses. And I'm sure there are other ways also. Um, I guess one other way. This is a more electronic music or like Ableton-y way, but you can use LFOs.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm down to talk about LFOs and Ableton sometime if you want. But basically, it's just like if you have, for example, a shape that's doing this, right? It goes up, drops, goes up, drops, and then you map that onto like a gain or
Hmm.
something. Then it just means the sound's going to keep doing that. So that's just another way to get it, where it's like it's not reverse, but it sounds a little bit like reversal things. It has like that shape has like a contour that we associate with reversed audio.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. And then one other thing that's related to all of this, I'm going to go out a layer.
So those would be LFOs on volume
Oh yeah.
or like attack.
Yeah. LFOs. So like yeah, LFO mapped to volume slash like gain. And so the
Hmm.
way that I'll do this in Ableton is that I'll just open up like an LFO object that or not an LFO, but just an LFO thing. I don't think object is the Ableton word. And I'll set it to up. So you get these lines. And then
Hmm.
there's like a button that says like map or something like that.
Hmm.
And then depending on how quiet I want it to go, I might either use like in like the EQ8 object, which is just kind of my like go-to EQ. And the lowest you can turn something down in that is like negative 12 dB.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's some cool stuff that you can do. You can also map it to like for example, if you have like a high or like a low pass filter, so it's like filtering out the high frequencies, you can have the LFO like move the filter around, and that can sound really cool too. That gets more into maybe like electronic music, and I think you're trying to go. Um,
It could work.
yeah, it is really cool to see. Like I've gotten really into doing this lately, and it's been really cool to see like what types of sounds it creates. But yeah, basically exploring mapping it to gain is going to be or to volume. You'll see you can just like see the volume shoot up from like negative infinity to like minus 3 dB and just keep doing that. And yeah, so that would be a way to do that. One of the other things, excuse me, that I was hearing in the My Bloody Valentine example is that the rhythmic elements slash like pulse elements of the low sounds and the high sounds are separate. Um but they feel related. So like for example, with the high sound, the high middle sound, it sounds like there's just like a tremolo on it, just like a really kind of consistent tremolo pulse. Um, and obviously the pulses on the side are like a little bit less even, but it's not like they're in totally different tempos. And it's also not like there's like a different polyrhythm. Like they feel pretty tempo related, even though it's like a little bit like rough around the edges, you know? And so that's really interesting too. Yeah. Um, yeah, and I think that's all the stuff off the top of my head that we could work with. Or the things that I just that jumped out to me that we talked about that we could pick up on. So
Yeah, I was trying to streamline this. So like
totally.
if I have 4 hours on Saturday and four
Mhm.
hours on Sunday, which is like a good amount of time
Totally.
to try to sketch stuff out, I'm going to like just armchairing like the process. I'm gonna sit down, dork around, and probably find something that sounds cool and be like, okay, here's an axis I can like orbit around for a bit and see what sticks. And then I'll probably be like, all right, this is like the the cool tension to like cathartic spot that like I'm hoping to leverage as like satisfying and then also build some other satisfying elements around it. But I could see myself getting lost in like the myriad of options.
Mm,
So I'll need to be like, I'm just trying to identify what to be aware of and maybe look for solutions for those things that I know probably will come up. That's a big one. And then the workflow of like actually recording it and then
mhm.
just being like, this take is good enough, I'll rep this.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, just sort of like having everything set up in a way, like I think the best way to use those 8 hours
Mhm.
effectively would be like I'm just running through stuff,
Yeah,
um, and not having like an hour lost because I'm like plugging a bunch of stuff in or
totally.
switching like what I'm recording on, or like I have an idea and then it's like, oh, let me put all these chords on like a 404 and then I can like, you know,
Totally.
automate something, or let me, pick up the electron and like map it to that.
Yeah,
I feel like that'll eat up some time. So I don't know. Maybe it could be like 1 hour. Like the goal is like do 8 sketches, 1 hour per sketch, and just like see what you can get down. And then if there's something that's really cool where I'm like, oh, I'd rather just focus on this sketch and get it like really good than
Mhm.
like have 8 kind of whatever things, then I can make that call. But it
Totally.
gets me out of like perfectionism mode or something.
Yeah, yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, actually, I'm gonna take a quick note here. Okay, so basically, one thing I want to figure out is like workflow. So just like getting things set up in a way that isn't going to interrupt the process once it's happening. Um, yeah, okay, and then there's the other bigger question of like like what do we do with this? Meaning what's above the notes on MBV. Okay, and so I feel like what we're getting into now is my idea for kind of the second part of how you could approach this, which is to say, rather than thinking about full songs, I think the goal is to just get deeper into this feeling.
Mhm.
So I'll just say here, goal, get deeper into the feeling.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting about that piece that we were studying is it's less than a minute. So
Mhm.
like it's possible to make someone that comfortable with the sound in a really short period of time.
Yeah, totally. And I think what it really comes down to is kind of like this is kind of I'll like be really specific of what I mean by this, but it's kind of like about like refining a style. Not necessarily style as in genre, but it's like, you know, how you use all of the like all the little details of things that you have to make it feel really personal and like distinctive. And so yeah, and so I think the reason that they can do that quickly is because it's so good at being what it is. Like it's so sure of itself.
Hmm.
And I think getting there or getting into a zone yeah, there's something that I want to say, but it's like 3 paragraphs long. So I'm just thinking about how to transition this into that. Yeah, basically making something that achieves that feeling that draws on this and satisfies you because you're in touch with the things that are happening in this piece of music, but is also something that works for you, or feels distinctive and feels like you and not like My Bloody Valentine. But it's like you've worked through what you liked from this and you've been able to carry the things on that you need and you've been able to let go of the things that you don't that as you work with them you're like, oh, I don't actually need this. Like that's I think that's more sort of the end goal. And so I'll just like, yeah, I'll start to get into just like what I would recommend doing. I think um start point, I think making a series of sketches is good. And the cool thing about the sketches is that like every time that you start something new, you're pretty quickly committing to a bunch of ideas. Even if it's just like it starts with this chord. It's in this key. I'm going to use this voicing. I'm going to use that voicing. And rewriting those sketches or like being like, now I'm going to start editing it is often less useful than just going through the whole process of decision making again. Because every time that you go through that process, at least at first, there are probably eventually diminishing returns on this, but as you go through the process, the more times you do it, the more you become informed about like, if I make this decision now, this is how it's going to matter 3 steps down the road, you know?
Hmm.
And so the more times that you can like iterate in that way, the more you'll like, yeah, the more you'll just kind of have like a very connected understanding of what you're doing and what the significance of everything is. So I
Hmm.
think a good, yeah, start point. And we can figure out how this relates to like the 8 hours goal or like the 2 4 hour sessions goal, which is a great way of thinking about it too. Like we can connect this to that in a little bit. Like I think that this is just like a way of working that I'll recommend, and then we can sort of map it onto your specific situation. But okay, so we've got this like make a series of sketches. Um, for each sketch, pick something that MBV does that you want your music to do. And when I say something that MBV does, I mean in this specific, like, you know, this excerpt, just the coda of Only Shallow. And so you can pick something in here, um, and be like, I'm gonna start off just trying to use this technique. Because it's like the way it all comes together is a style, but on its own, it's like, oh, they do this one thing with the chords, or like, oh, they do this one thing with like stereo width, you know. And whatever it is, you could just start off with yeah, with just picking one thing and being like, you know what, I'm maybe in an hour. This is probably a ridiculous suggestion I'm going to make, but like within an hour, try to make like 4 things that do this one thing, which just forces you. I mean, that's 15 minutes, so you just go through it super quickly, which means you really have not that much attachment to anything other than what you're discovering by going through the process, you
Hmm.
know? And maybe you'll find something the second time that you really like. And then the third time you're like, ah, this sucks. And then the fourth time you're like, oh, this is kind of interesting. But by going through it those 4 times, even if you find something good early on, you're just gonna like learn things. So then there comes the sort of question of like, if you have a bunch of stuff, um, probably probably there's going to be some working on some passes or sketches that you spend more than 15 minutes on. I'm just giving that as an example of like you could just like rapid fire things. But let's say that you have some sketches that are like super minimal, like maybe you spent an hour tops on them, and then there's a question of like, well, what do I do to it next? um this is where things get really cool and they get kind of like sculptural in a way, maybe sculptural in the old school sense of like you're like just like you're chipping away and you're bringing it through like many passes, you know. I don't know, maybe there are sculptors that do things differently than that, but just like in the sense that it's like something that's like refined and refined and refined, and it's a sound that you're refining, like it's kind of it's got this like physical presence. um when you're like, okay, I've made something, now I'm going to give it another pass and I'm going to pick another thing that they're doing and try to imitate that. And
Mhm.
so then you go through another pass, and in the second pass, you can be super unsentimental with what you do in the first pass. Like, and you can always save different versions. You could bring the same, let's say, pass A through two different processes. Like, so we have the same starting point. We've got A, and then you put it through process B and process C, and you save them separately, Like, you can always totally do that. And I think the idea is to just really kind of get your hands in the paint. I'm mixing all kinds of art metaphors now, but basically um and just like start experimenting with all of these options. And I think where this is eventually going to go is that like your sort of toolkit for creating things that feel like they belong in the sound world is going to expand, and there are going to be some things that you find where you're like, oh, this is great, like this is what I wanted. And there are going to be other things maybe that you'll do in a way that sounds very, very, very close to the record, but you realize, oh, like that part of what they're doing is actually less interesting to me than the way that I would have done it before I did this exercise. And when you start to find those things, that's where you're kind of locating your own personality kind of in relation to the model.
Mhm.
You're like, and then that's cool because that kind of gives you a point of departure to be like, oh, I don't actually need to be my Bloody Valentine. Like there are just specific things that I wanted to learn, and then I can kind of take it my own way. And I mentioned that because I've been going through a lot of that in the last year, as I've just been like dealing with people. I mean, like Tim Hecker's music, just like trying to copy it until I reach a point where I want to do it differently, and that's really cool because then it feels like I've dealt with it in some way. Um, but yeah, so you go through that. And the other cool thing about working with all of these sketches is that they all there are so many things about each sketch that you might make that will turn out to be useful either 2 hours later or the next day, or maybe even like 3 months later, like, but you'll come across something that you kind of unlocked, um like, or you found a new way to combine certain things that you're interested in or whatever. And it doesn't suggest, like, you don't see where to take it from where you got it. Like, it seems like it's like a sketch that's kind of interesting, but there's no way forward that you can see. And yet that same thing might turn out to be really useful in a week, and I'm thinking about this because when I was doing these kind of electronic sketches last September, I was really on a roll in like mid-September, like especially like the 15th and the 16th. I was just getting like things that I really liked immediately. And then the 17th, I was like, I don't know, I'm just messing around with a bunch of LFOs. And then on the 18th, I was like, I don't know, I'm just messing around with a bunch of LFOs. And then on the 19th, I was like, oh, I did something that sounds pretty much the same as this, like the 17th and the 18th, but all of a sudden today it comes together in a way that starts to suggest something. And so, but that wouldn't have happened without those days of just experimenting with all of those things. Um, and then on the 20th, something else that was completely different showed up as a result of just kind of playing around with a lot of the same sounds and stuff. Yeah, and so it's just basically this idea where as you get into the techniques, they start to feed back on each other. And you start to yeah, not like audio feedback, but like the ideas start to feed into one another. And you start to have some real agency with it.
Mhm.
And then if we're thinking about this on the level, for example, of like maybe the sketches that we're making are like 30 seconds, like 30 seconds to 1 minute. Um, then I think, and and so also for this, we're excluding the idea that it's even like a song. Like we don't have to have vocals unless you want to process the vocals in a way that feels like it's part of the texture, like if that
Mhm.
shows up in a way that's creative, that's really cool. Um, but yeah, like just having the goal be for some amount of time, we're just going to try to dig into the world that they're creating here and imitate what they're doing enough that you can really get your hands on it. But as you do that, you're kind of following your creativity and stuff. Yeah, I feel like that this is a really like hands-on way to get into this type of feeling where it's really compelling, or at least it's like very orally, like you're getting sounds are satisfying. And maybe after this, you'll realize that there's something that's beneath all of this. There's some fundamental thing that we can't see from this point of view. That was the thing that you really liked. And it's really cool when that happens because if it's something that's really like fundamental that you really like, then it means that you could apply it to a totally different context and get something that feels really new and distinctive and personal. So yeah, does this make sense?
For sure.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking how to tie it in with other stuff. I booked some shows in Washington for when I go back, and I don't really have a set. I have like old sets I could play, but I've already done them there. So I'm like, oh, maybe I should make something new. But unless I buy a guitar over there, I'll probably not fly with a guitar and
Yeah.
travel around. So maybe I'll try to get this to be like 404 focused. Um, TBD. Figure it out.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So it's worth talking about workflow and stuff because so much of the way that I have been thinking, which I'm realizing is kind of implicit, is that like I think because of the My Bloody Valentine example, and I think because I've just been working at Ableton so much of what I was imagining was probably just like guitar through amp into a DAW, or guitar through amp, maybe with a delay pedal in the
Mhm.
middle into a DAW. Um, and for me, that works really well because that workflow, other than setting up the mics on the guitar amp, that workflow can be really fast. And the other thing I have to do is not start noodling on the guitar. I just have to like be like super like this is what the guitar is for right now, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so as far as having a time efficient process, that's really worth talking about. I feel like that's something that I didn't dig into in the response that I just gave you as much as we could. Like, I don't actually know that much about the 404. Is there a way that you could see working with the 404 that would be useful for this?
For the sketches, I think it'll like 404 stuff will come after if like
Okay.
sketches prove interesting and fruitful. But
Yeah.
I'll probably have my mixer
Hmm.
plugged into my 8 track. And then on the mixer, I can have lots of like sidechain stuff. Like, oh, here's clean and here's like at the end of the effects chain.
Cool.
And then I could also have like a mic plugged in if I ever want to mess around with that. That should give me some options.
Yeah.
Um,
And are you imagining doing all of this in that
oh,
setup, or is all of this eventually going into like a DAW?
I mean, it'll go into the digital 8, I imagine.
Okay.
It's easier for me than the DAW,
Hmm.
um, just because it's mostly like by touch.
Yeah.
There's some menu diving, but like all the fades and the panning is like a lot more deliberate. So I kind of
Cool.
enjoy that.
Sweet.
Um,
And just while I'm kind of digging in here, because I'm making sure that we're gonna be able to get the things that we want from this setup. Do you have a way of dealing with like stereo width and you're like panning and stuff? But like for example, if you wanted something to be only on the sides and not in the center, is there something that you could get that would let you do that with this
yeah,
setup?
I just dupe the track and then pan to both sides,
Cool.
which yeah, there's no like stereo image generator type of
Yeah,
thing like
yeah, totally.
get out of a DAW. Because like I don't know if theoretically you have 100 left, 100 right, if that's just perfect, like
Yeah. And
double the
so
volume.
yeah, yeah. And so the thing yeah, the thing there, I'm sure there's a way to do this with your setup. But this is gear that I don't know so well. It's like if you pull them out of phase, like you pull
Yeah.
them like a little bit apart, then it sounds like it's yeah, then we get the stereo thing. But if they're the exact same audio at the exact same time, we do just move it to the center kind of perceptually. Um, yeah, it'll be cool to talk about this. It's gonna be cool how you deal with to hear how you deal with things like low passing and stereo and stuff. Because to me, that's such a distinctive thing, and that was one of the things you'd mentioned in relation to the other band, where things were like kind of narrow and like straight down the middle. Um, and I think one of the things that really satisfies my ears has to do with at least for headphone listening, like stereo image stuff. Um, and then two things really quick. One, Joe Bransford started doing a Substack recently. I don't know if you've checked this out, but he's talking about something that might be really useful for exactly this kind of thing, which is like how he performs live with basically with like looping or with sort of like I think the word is like asynchronous looping. So he's working with different loops of different sizes, and he's not like building a loop in live performance. It's like he has a bunch of different audio things, different tracks that are different lengths that he's playing and starting and stopping. He was talking about setting up the right number of things that he can do to each loop in real time. And he had limited it to like 4 or 5 parameters per sound, which is like relative to what's possible. That's like really not very many parameters. So I'll just send you this right now because it's like it's so good and it really sparked a lot of thought for me. Yeah, Patch Notes is what it's called.
Yeah,
Um,
I have it pulled up. This is similar to something I was doing with the Electron, because like you can set the amount of bars to repeat or like steps in the sequence
oh, cool.
per track. So like my drums could be just like 8, and then my instrument could be 16, and then another thing could be 4, and those are all like
Yeah.
at different times. And then uh Electron has like a ratio uh setting, so like you can have it use notes in the sequence once every 3 times or something. So then like you get this weird variation and like unpredictability. And it can also be like a percentage of randomness, right? So like 100% random or 50.
Cool.
That'll be
Yeah.
fun.
And then one of the ways that I was imagining that this could interact with like a live performance thing is like if you make a bunch of little sketches that kind of get into this sound world, and then you're working with this like the device that you're talking about or something that allows you to like sample and process audio live. It could be interesting if you even were to start stacking different sketches and like fading them in and out and stuff, which is pretty much how I've been approaching electronic music performance. It's just like, except I'm doing it like in, Ableton, like the live viewer, you can just trigger different samples and stuff, but it's like fading things in and out. So it's kind of like DJing, but with like, up to like 5 or 6 different things playing at once and no pulse, which is why I can
Mhm.
do like if they were all different tempos with drums, it would sound psychotic. But yeah, I don't know. And so I don't know if that's like useful for you necessarily. Maybe this is just like here's what I would do. But I don't know. Maybe there's something in there. So figured I would mention it.
For sure. Yeah, I think just like putting in the time and getting muscle memory, this is like just fundamental, and then we can get into
Yeah.
crazier stuff once it's like more of a second nature.
Yeah. And then I have a kind of a bigger picture comment too, which I guess as I'm thinking about it, I'm realizing is like a little bit of a change of subject. So if there's anything else that we should
I
cover
think I think I'm
first,
pretty set for the sketch goals.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think kind of a bigger picture takeaway here is that there are things going on in the production of this music that are really speaking to you. And I wonder how much it's these specific things like, oh, they did this with stereo image, they did this with like having these different signals, or one like they start with the same place, but one sounds like it's pitch shifted up an octave and the rhythms are different or whatever, like and I think there are a lot of little things in there that are going to be really useful and could be like really like liberating once you get your hands on them to just like hear the music and be like, oh yeah, I know how to get all those sounds, and then it just sparks a different level of thing than like, at least for me, than listening to it and being like, wow, I really wish I knew how to do that.
Mhm.
But I think about with stereo image, like one of the craziest experiences that I've had with sound in recent memory was like it's like on the 4th of July last year. I'm not an especially patriotic person or anything. But I was at Washington Square Park with my significant other, and we were like sitting on a blanket. And I think it was like as everything was going on. I don't think there were any events in the park at that time, but I was hearing fireworks like echoing off different buildings and stuff, because it's like lower Manhattan. And the experience of like depth and also of like sonic space was crazy because you could like feel different sounds coming from different directions, and some of them had more bass or less bass in them. And it was like it was just like what a sound system can do times like 1,000 or something. Like it was just this really incredible experience of sound. And there was also a funny thing where there was like somebody with like a little cheap radio that was playing a bunch of like late 90s, early aughts, like R&B. When everything kind of had like the break beat, like sort of like type of thing, but it was like it's kind of like Outcast era stuff, but like more radio-ish than that. And so just the pairing of that music with these crazy explosions from like a long distance away, with like the feeling and also like the sound of trees and stuff, like it was a really incredible experience of sound that I'm still chewing on. And I think like as we maybe or as one goes through this process of working with sounds in a really hands-on way, thinking about how sound exists in the broader world, or like how we relate to sound in general, can be a really interesting way to start taking these techniques but applying them in ways that maybe the technology doesn't directly suggest, or the ways that other musicians might not have thought of. And for me, that's been really interesting and useful and like generative, and has led me to create things that I feel like I don't fully understand because I haven't heard them before. And that's cool. Like, and I don't think anybody, I mean, in some cases, if I'm like layering certain types of field recordings with certain types of sounds, like it's not a crazy technological invention, but there's something in how it all comes together, like perceptually, that feels unique. Like I wonder if you're just like in situations in the world and you just like think, and there's something about the sounds that you're hearing or the combinations of sounds that you're hearing, if there's something that speaks to you, it can be interesting to take note of that and think about how that relates to ways that we're working with sound when we make music.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, that'll be fun to explore, especially like the more poetic ones than like the guy at West Fourth who plays the drums in the middle of the walkway. Like that sound I've
Oh yeah.
recorded multiple times, but that's just like, oh yeah, add reverb to it. Whereas like the sound of like wind blowing through a bunch of trees is similar to the fireworks thing, where it's like different sounds uh, with different rhythms, but all kind of like this vague chorus of pleasantries. Be fun. I'll definitely play around with that.
Yeah, and then I think where it gets really crazy is like if you were to like listen to like wind like blowing through branches or something, and you're to be like, is there something rhythmic here that I would want to create, but maybe like only in the like the low mid frequencies with these guitars that I'm like low passing. So totally different frequency context, the
Mm-hmm.
kind of the like signifier of like the sound of trees, is gone. So we're not necessarily, but there's something in like the rustling, there's some kind of rhythmic thing where you're like, can I recreate that in a completely different context? And that can be a way to generate really new, yeah, just generate some really interesting things. So that's something that I'm always thinking about when I'm working with sound too. And I feel like past a certain point, it's like once we've got the tools down, and there are always more tools and stuff, but the question of like, what are we trying to do with them? From a very like material point of view, just like, let's make some new sounds, like that can be a way to break things open that I think is really useful. So, or has been useful for me. So,
For sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Trying to think if there's any other noteworthy stuff. This we do an hour, right?
Yeah, I can go over by like a few minutes.
Trying to think if I have any burning questions. Um, Nothing major. I think the biggest thing I'm trying to do that's been a theme is like move beyond the open sea of decisions to make.
Mm,
And so the sketch exercise, I think, will confront that issue.
totally.
It's like get me to push past it. Um, yeah, other than that, things are going good. I might sell the Mustang and try to get something with like P90s or humbuckers.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I just got to like put it in a bag and go from store to store, put it on Craigslist.
Yeah.
We'll
One other thing related to sort of the like the open sea of possibilities. Because like I get a little bit overwhelmed by this, especially because I'm working on a lot of things right now that are just they've taken a lot of time and they're just gonna take a lot more time. Something that kind of prevents the overwhelm is like, yeah, with the sketches, it can be useful because you're like, well, I'm just putting one foot in front of another. Like I'm just doing something. And being able to hear a suggestion, like maybe what I was saying about sounds relating to sounds in the broader world, it's like consciously being like, I'm just gonna kind of tuck this away in the back of my mind somewhere, and maybe it's gonna be useful in like 6 months. Like I think being able to clear like, or for me, I have to do it very consciously. I have to be like, I can't worry about that right now. I'm just gonna do this one thing. It's like by doing that, it allows, at least for me, it seems to, for the most part, allow me to be like, there's going to be a time for that, and then eventually the time will come for that, and it's all good. But like Otherwise, I'll just be overwhelmed. Which still happens because I'm trying to do like a lot of things, kind of all at the same time. But yeah, I don't know. It's just a way that I try to think about pacing. Like, so I'm working on these two records right now, and I was listening to stuff that I'm working on, and I've been working on one of them for like more than 10 hours a week, probably 15 to 20 hours a week, for the last like 5 weeks. And I was seeing how far I have to go. And the things that I'm listening to, I'm like, oh, these are a lot further along than they were, but they're still not done. And so it's like I can't comprehend like, oh, June 23rd is what I want, like a draft of the record done. Like I'm like all I can do is just kind of put my foot in front of the other foot, you know. I don't know. So that's just a thought there. I'm sure you I mean, you know, like I'm sure you've thought about things like this before, worked on big projects, but it's something I'm actively reminding myself right now. So
Yeah. Yeah. There's always, I think you're getting the muscle memory of cutoff points. Just being like,
yeah,
all right, that's, I've bled this stone as much as I can, you know?
yeah.
Um, yeah. I got to finish all the design and duplication stuff, and then I'll be able to walk away from that project I started last year, just kind of sitting around. Um, cool. So just to recap expectations, I'm gonna dedicate 2 days this weekend,
Mm-hmm.
and before I start doing anything, obviously like set up all the gear so it's ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna sit down and just shortlist like here are 6 elements I can pick from, and then each hour pick one or two of those elements and be like, okay, I'm gonna focus on stereo image for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Um, experiment, find something with the expectation that it's going to be fairly short, unless I want to make it long. Um, find those sort of like hinge areas where it's like, oh yeah, this is accomplishing what I want to get out of this.
Mm-hmm.
Polish it up, record it, um, and then just rinse and repeat. Just kind of keep running through that. Um, yeah, I mean, it sounds good. I'll try to document how the experience goes, beyond just like here's what I came up with. You know,
Cool.
if I find areas that suck a lot of time or stuff that goes really well, I'll just be like, oh yeah, this happened, this was cool, this wasn't so fun.
Yeah.
Um, nice. Yeah, this sounds good. Um, I'll try to get some time in next week, depending on what happens with apartment stuff
Yeah.
for coursework. But it's been going well. I think I wrote something in minor recently, but I want to finish that and then look at the other modes and stuff.
Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah. Yeah, just one thing on that note is that yeah, like paying attention to the process, seeing where like there are blocks, there are things that are taking up way more time than is ideal. That's been super useful for me. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, and I think this sounds exciting. I'm excited to hear what you come up with.
Yeah, yeah, same. I am sparked with inspiration. So finally, I'll have something to bring to class.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, yeah, talk to you soon, and yeah, good luck with apartment stuff.
For sure. Yeah, appreciate the time. Maybe I'll jump in on Saturday.
Awesome. All right. Hopefully see you then.
Yeah, thanks, Cole.
Awesome. No problem.
Later.
Yeah, see you.
With something like guitar lessons, like I want to play that Robert Fripp solo, or like this is the sound I'm going for, versus with this class it's more about finding your sound, which I think is extremely important if you're trying to create like meaningful music that connects with people but also with yourself. Like none of us are blank slates. Everybody coming into this course identifies in some way or another as an artist or a musician who, again, hasn't necessarily unlocked what they want to unlock.
I'm currently opening up a limited number of 45-minute strategy calls. On the calls, we're going to 1, get serious about your goals, 2, identify what's holding you back. And 3, make a roadmap together for how you can move forward and really achieve those goals. And after that, if it's a fit, we'll talk about working together. So if you're ready to grow as a guitarist, as an artist, and maybe even as a human being, there should be a little button below where you can click to book a time. So bring your story and we'll do the rest together. See you soon.